Hello, welcome to another hot topic. This week I'm talking to Melanie On, Labour Member of Parliament for Great Grimsby. Melanie, thank you very much for coming back in.
Thank you.
Seems a long time since I've seen you in this studio. Quite a lot's happened this summer.
Yes, yeah, it's been incredibly busy.
Let's start with the internal woes of the Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn, you were one of the members of Parliament who resigned from his shadow government earlier this summer, didn't have confidence in him as a leader, as something you have in common with most Labour MPs. And yet he got re-elected with a massive landslide by the membership of the Labour Party. Does that give you any more confidence in him as a man capable of leading the Labour Party to victory?
It doesn't change my view of Jeremy's capabilities and where we are now. It's I'm willing to give Jeremy the opportunity to prove himself, but that does mean that Jeremy needs to work on that and he needs to start communicating better with his MPs. And at the moment, I think we're all still settling back into Westminster after a very fractious summer. So we'll see how it goes. The membership, obviously, are really keen to see the Labour Party led by Jeremy, and this is his opportunity.
Raises a few issues. First of all, can I just get what your objection to him is? Because I can't quite see the ideological difference between Corbyn and the Parliamentary Labour Party. I mean, there are issues where he's a bit North London, but I can't quite see a big ideological divide. He's not the great sort of left-wing ogre that I can identify that some might paint him.
I think that what we've found over the course of the last year or so since Jeremy was first elected is that there has been very little communication. And if you want people to get on board with your vision, with your direction of travel for the Labour Party
and the Labour
Parliamentary
Labour
MPs,
Party.
absolutely. You know, if you want people to get on board with that, then there needs to be a dialogue and you need to be working with them to try and convince them and get them on board. And there are some people in the Labour Party who have very different ideas to Jeremy in terms of the future direction of the Labour Party. And Jeremy's focus has very much, to me, seemed to be about building that grassroots movement, which is fantastic because I know in my local Labour Party we're always talking about how we can attract new people to come and join us and support us and talk to the wider electorate and try and work towards improving our electoral successes. But what Jeremy hasn't done for us who are going out into our communities is give us a clear steer on what it is that we're talking to people about, what it is that the Labour Party is offering to people, and really inspiring us in that place within the walls of Parliament to go out and deliver that message. And that's a really crucial thing because you cannot be the leader of a party, and those people who should have the most kind of direct contact and really feel that they want to be part of that journey, really feeling quite apathetic about it.
So he's failing to communicate with his own members of Parliament. Is he failing to communicate with the people as a whole? Because one of the criticisms of him isn't that he's a man without ideas or without clear ideas, but he's a man who's not capable of persuading the general electorate of being of agreeing with those ideas. So is it the criticism to some extent that his work as an advocate, of a persuader, as a presenter is not good enough?
I think what we would like to see is that the focus is on how we're going to win elections in the current system that we have. And the creation of the movement only works if that movement then mobilises and works in the constituencies and focuses in a way that we need to in order to win those constituencies going forward. And we haven't seen that happen. What's happened is that the movement that has grown has almost turned...
You mean the membership?
I mean the movement of the membership, absolutely. I mean, there's a specific group that is called Momentum that people might have heard of.
That's
specifically,
Corbyn supporting them.
Yeah, exactly. They're there because Jeremy is the leader. And that is, you know, I think that's positive in a lot of ways. But what has happened is that it's turned in on the Labour Party. So now we've got this struggle within the Labour Party of people who've been around the Labour Party for many, many years, through all the leaders who've gone out, campaigned, knocked on doors, you know, come wind, rain, snow, etc. And a group of new members who think that everything that's been done before hasn't really cut it. They're still angry about the Labour Party when we were in power from 1997, and use that as a way to say, you know, people who've been around for a very long time perhaps aren't as good a Labour Party member as they ought to be. And so it's caused an awful lot of problems within the Labour Party. And now we're coming out of that. I'm hoping that we can heal some of those divisions.
Well, are you coming out of it? It doesn't look as if you're coming out of it.
Well, I think so. I mean, that's a kind of potted history of things that have been going on within the Labour Party for a while.
Go back to Keir Hardie here. But
but I think that we are coming out of that. Some of that, though, still means that Jeremy needs to bring everybody together, and actually, you know, been a little bit quiet in recent weeks, which I wasn't expecting.
Just one last thing on the Corbyn thing, that the new members, I mean, it's the vast majority of members now are newish members within one of Jeremy Corbyn's two leadership election victories. Are they sort of fair weather friends, or are they fellow travellers? Are they people who really do have views which are quite different from the Labour Party of the last 100 years or so, and that they're coming in and trying to perform a sort of a Leninist coup d'etat? And there's very little point in convincing them, because they're a minority of self-identified politicos of a particular view, and they're going to be no help in persuading the people who need to be persuaded to win a general election.
I think it's a real mix. I mean, obviously there are long-standing members of the Labour Party who are very keen supporters of Jeremy, but amongst the newer members, again, I think that there is a real divide. And if you look at Momentum, there are splits now within the leadership of Momentum, and so it's very difficult to say. If I talk to some MPs who are part of that Momentum movement, they will say to me there's a kind of old guard of the left that's very traditional, very kind of 1970s old Labour, but there's also a huge growth within that Momentum movement of a new left, which is much more concerned about global issues, so much more concerned about the environment, much more concerned about international affairs, much more outward looking. And so even within that group, there seem to be different sets of people. If I look at it on a local level, we've had some new members joining in our local party who've been very keen to help, and that's been a really welcome addition, so that's fantastic. But we've had a massive growth in membership. We've probably over doubled in size of membership in Great Grimsby, and I wouldn't say that we've seen all of those people at our meetings or coming out and joining us when we are running street stalls or knocking on doors.
You think they maybe join just to vote for the leadership?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, some people, if they want to join a political party, not everybody wants to be an activist and doing those things. Some of them just wanted to demonstrate support and participate in a vote.
There's a wider spectrum of views within the Labour Party. It's an even broader church than it has been in the past. Just to remind us, where would you identify yourselves in this sort of Bolshevik, Menshevik dichotomy that's going on here? You're not one of those who's dissatisfied with the Blair-Brown government of the first decade of the century.
Well, I think that there are successes, and we should always remember those successes, and that they were very progressive years. And I think too easily those things are forgotten, and the negative things that happened during those years are the things that are focused on, and that does detract. However, I do think that we can't keep harking back to those days. We do have to move on. And I think Jeremy Corbyn has definitely shifted the Labour Party back into a place where lots of people in the Labour Party are much more comfortable. It's not this idea of a radical new Labour Party, but that departure from the centre ground does mean that it's a lot more difficult to convince people who we know do go out and vote, if they are not particularly interested in politics, but do go out and put their cross in a box at a general election, that somebody that they see as being very, very left-wing, that whether or not they are prepared to support that person. And I would say where I am is I'm left of centre. You know, I will always say that I'm left of centre. Where the party moves is.
But it also depends where the centre is. And I do want to go back to in the second half. We'll go on to the danger proposed by people who vote but aren't particularly interested in politics. But when you say that they perceive Jeremy Corbyn as very left-wing, again, I come back to my first question. I can't find a sort of anything that identifies his philosophy or ideology, other than the fact that he's from a sort of a culture of been photocopying activism in North London. I can't find what makes him so very left-wing. And I'm so sorry, but very quickly, am I wrong?
I think that he would certainly characterise himself as being of the left. So, you know, this is a kind of old branch of Marxism that I think that he identifies with.
There we go. That was the word I was looking for. Melanie, you have to stop there for a moment. Back in a couple of minutes. Join me again then. Welcome back. I'm still with Melanie on Labour Member of Parliament for Great Grimsby. Melanie, you'll have noticed Brexit, one of the two or three big cataclysmic bits of politics that have happened recently. Now, we won't rehash all the issues involved in that. You were, well, I'll ask you to declare which side you were campaigning for in that vote.
I campaigned for Remain.
Disappointed?
Yes, disappointed, but not entirely surprised.
You mentioned in the first half the idea of people who vote but aren't particularly interested in politics.
Yeah, I think that this probably changed that description. I think that everybody who participated in the referendum suddenly did become a lot more interested in politics, partly because they couldn't escape it. But it was a single issue. It was everywhere they looked. So, yeah, I think that definitely spurred people on to register to vote and then get out there and use their vote on the day.
Interested in politics, but well-informed?
As well-informed as they could be. I think that there was a lot of information, a lot of misinformation, but in terms of, you know, if people wanted to find information, there were no end of independent sources where they could actually go beyond the two campaigns, the Leave and Remain campaigns, to get impartial advice, because I think that when I was talking to people, one of the big concerns that they had was that they just didn't believe either side because it was too much rhetoric, too much you know, promising or dismissing on either side. Well, so they just couldn't believe it.
Let's not rehash, let's not do an autopsy there, but as a consequence of that, there are going to be changes in British law, or at least changes in the sources of and authorities for British law. And one of the areas that I know that you've been active on recently is employment law. Is there any way that, I mean, this Great Repeal Act is sort of getting rid of all European legislation and then just sticking back the bits that Parliament, the Westminster Parliament likes? That's the idea behind it. How's that working in terms of employment law? Because you've been involved in a debate just last week about that, I think.
That's right. We've been given assurances from the Prime Minister and senior members of the Cabinet that there is no intention to look at undermining workers' rights in this country as they stand. My concern, despite those assurances, really is that at the point of the introduction of the Great Repeal Bill and the transposition of European law into UK law, that the fragility of that law as it stands is going to be so weak that it can be undermined incrementally, and it's not a particularly easy thing to get across to people, but essentially, unless it's in primary legislation,
so an actual
act of Parliament, then the laws will be in secondary legislation, and that can be taken away very easily through things called statutory instruments, which means that there's no debate in the House of Commons whatsoever, no vote on those things. And my fear is that in language that will come through streamlining regulation, releasing the burdens of business. This is all just by the decision of a minister rather than... Yeah, absolutely. And trying to, you know, in this new world that we're going to have post-Brexit, trying to make things easier for business, trying to, you know, if there are any penalties or difficulties that come as a result of Brexit, then trying to say to business, well, these are the things that we can do to make your life easier. And unfortunately, the casualty of that may well be workers' rights.
So what's the mechanics of making that work? I mean, do you pass a British Westminster Employment Rights Act before the European law stops applying, so that it duplicates it, overlaps it, but then you need to know runs underneath all law? Whenever European law stops, there'll be that British law already in place. I mean, would that be possible?
I think what we need in relation to this issue, which is something that I am very passionate about, is to make sure that there are transitional arrangements at the point of the repeal bill going through that does enshrine and protect British workers as they stand in their entirety until such time that those laws can actually be put into primary legislation.
In Brexit, in a slightly wider sense, the High Court has put you in a slightly embarrassing situation as a remaining supporter member of Parliament, in that they have kind of thrown back the responsibility on triggering Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, which is what gets us out of the European Union, and saying that that isn't just a decision for the Prime Minister, for the executive under the royal prerogative, that that's a decision that must be made by Parliament. Now, you and a majority of members of the Parliamentary Labour Party and a majority of members of the House of Commons would prefer Europe to stay within, if you followed your consciences and your hearts as you vote, as I hope you always do when you vote in Parliament. So if you do find yourself having to debate again the issues that were debated in the EU referendum, it's possible, isn't it, that Parliament might come to a decision other than that that was arrived at by the people, and that you might be voting for that decision other than that derived by the referendum.
Well, I think we've got to look at the decision that was reached by the courts and say that the decision that they reached to put the power back into the hands of Parliament is exactly what those people who voted for leave were voting for. They were voting to have sovereignty of Parliament put back into the hands of the people that they elect, and that is exactly what's happened here. So when that decision comes before Parliament, it will be debated. I don't think it has to be a rerun of the whole of the referendum again. And I do think that
But it'll be the same question.
There may well be the same. Well, it won't be the same question, because it will be about, it's the triggering of Article 50, so this is about then starting the negotiations about leaving. But when the British public have made their decision, I think for parliamentarians to try and go into Parliament and say, actually, you know, what you've decided we're not going to follow through on, I think would be incredibly dangerous, which is why bringing forward the issue around workers' rights, for me, doing it as early as possible. So I did this before the summer break and had the debate then in early September. So it's been on the government's radar right from the beginning, because at the point that Article 50 does get triggered, I want all of these issues to be worked out in the government's mind before they start the negotiations.
I'll take you back to the more general point. You mentioned that people who campaigned to come out of Europe were campaigning precisely for a sovereign parliament. Now, famously, part of that aspect of a sovereign parliament is an individual MP is elected not as a delegate of the people who elected her, but as their representative. They're not electing you to agree with whatever they think. They're electing you because they trust your independent judgment. So that does entitle you, does it not, to entitle you and your fellow MPs to vote against the will of the people, because they put their trust in your judgment rather than giving you an instruction. That's the constitutional arrangement which is supported by the Brexit vote. Yeah,
except across the whole of the country, the Remain campaign lost the argument, and I think that you know, as difficult as it will be, the responsibilities now are to make sure that upon leaving the European Union, we get the very best that we can out of it, to make sure that transitional arrangements are put in place, and to make sure that, you know, the unexpected things that, for those of us who campaigned to remain and warned people about, which was dismissed as scaremongering, that those risks are minimised as much as possible so that people don't get a nasty shock. We've talked several times, you've had this phrase about people who aren't interested in politics voting, people maybe who aren't particularly well informed in politics voting. That's resulted in a Brexit vote which you regret. It's voted in a support for a leader of the Labour Party which you might regret. And it's resulted in the election of Donald Trump to the presidency of the United States of America. What do you think, Melanie? Democracy, it was a good idea, wasn't it? Splendid way of running ancient Athens, but it's had its day. The experiment's over. It's lost its authority, hasn't it? What are you suggesting as an alternative, Hugh? Do you think we should have an autocracy? I'm merely asking a question. Perhaps we could go back to the Queen making all the decisions for us, and perhaps things would be a lot I think there might be a surprising amount of support for that, actually. There might be. Some sort of platonic ideal, but it is a bit frightening, isn't it? What's gone wrong? Yeah, I'm not suggesting that I'm opposing any of those conclusions, but the ignorance that's quite clear, especially in the American electorate. Wow, that's a big assumption for you to make, that the American electorate is
result
ignorant.
Of study and empirical observation.
But I think that, you know, it's the same. Information is out there if people want to go and get it. We've never had easier access to the internet through people's phones. So there are opportunities. And I think that people are voting much more on the basis of what they feel rather than on the basis of a fact that's laid in front of them. Because you can present a set of facts and then you can present another set of facts that completely, oppose it. So people are just going on a gut instinct. And I think what we've seen in America was people saying, we've had enough of political establishment, so let's bring in somebody new. Let's bring in somebody from a business background. We know him, he's been on the TV, he owns a tower, so let's give him a go. And, you know, I don't know American politics all that well, and certainly don't know America all that well.
But even
for those,
can I just pick up one point you made? People are voting on their gut instinct, on their emotion rather than anything else. Is that a happy fact?
Well, I don't think it is a happy fact, no, because I feel like it's very reactionary then, and that's probably some of the result that we've seen with Donald Trump.
Melanie, I'm going to have to stop you there. Melanie On, democratically elected representative and Member of Parliament for Great Grimsby, thank you so much for coming on, as always.
Thank you.
That's all for Hot Topic this time. Please join me again next week. Cheerio.